Day 5 of the Scores Poetry Summit, Words in Action. My name is Angela Bailey. I'm coming to you from America Scores Bay Area, where we work with over 60 different school sites to provide free soccer, poetry, and service learning programming for youth. Across the country, we're in 11 different cities, working hard to provide programming for over 12,000 young poet athletes. And we call them poet athletes because they are learning life lessons and learning how to express themselves on the field and off the field, wherever the need may be. We've had an amazing week so far and very excited about this next session. But I would be remiss in my welcome if I did not thank the folks and our supporters who made this possible. First and foremost, to our organizing committee, Alicia Yano, Tamsin Smith, Dean Rader, and our CEO, Colin Schmidt, for bringing together such an impressive, stellar lineup of speakers, artists, authors, creatives, change makers. Very impressive, thank you. And of course, to our corporate supporters who care more than just about the bottom line, to the SAC brand group and to Soma Equity Capital for supporting the cause and helping us to bring this community together. So thanks to everybody. A special thanks to our speakers. So excited, like I said, for this session. It's so timely. Breaking Silences, Poets on the Legacy of Japanese American Imprisonment. We have Brian Komei Dempster here, who's going to moderate. USF professor and award-winning author, poet, writer, also activist. Very excited to have you here, Brian, and your panelists. I'll turn the mic over to you and thank you.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you to America Scores Bay Area. We're very grateful to be here. And I'm especially excited about this event because I'm presenting with two poets who I admire, but even more importantly, friends and sisters. And we're delighted to have you here today. What we're going to do is me, Mia, and Bryn will each present for about 15 or 20 minutes. We're going to show you some images at the outset that contextualize our poems. And then we're going to read some poems that obviously link to the legacy of Japanese American imprisonment. And then after our 3 reading/presentations, we're going to open it up for some Q&A with you and would love to interact. So happy that you're here on Friday, April 2nd. And I'm going to now go into screen share mode. Okay. All right. So open up my PowerPoint. I'm going to go to slideshow. All right. So this is my first book, Topaz, the cover. And Topaz refers to a concentration camp where Japanese Americans were imprisoned. It's in Utah. And this happened during World War II. My mother was there as an infant, and her brothers, sisters, and my grandmother were also incarcerated there. This is where they were taken from, the Nichiren Buddhist Church of America. And my grandfather is a Buddhist priest. He opened this church in early 1930s, 1931. And really, it was a place of gathering and strength and community for other Japanese Americans. And they practiced Buddhism. There was tea ceremony, there were arts, it was a very vibrant place. This is where my mother and her siblings grew up as well. And there he is, Oji-chan in his, I say Oji-chan in his kesa, which is a priest sort of outfit that he's wearing. So this is what he would have looked like as he stood in front of the altar, burning incense and leading services for his congregation. This is my grandmother, Oba-chan, and obviously wife of Oji-chan and my mother's mother. And I call her the glue and strength of the family. Later, you'll hear about the strong maternal figures in the Japanese American community, not just in my work, but in Bryn and Mia's work. And she was a talented poet. She was really, really, experienced in terms of culture and the arts, and very strong woman. There's a picture of my grandfather doing calligraphy. He was a master calligrapher. And I wanted you all to see this image because, you know, it does figure into some of the poems that I'm going to read today. And because today is all about artistic expression, I want to emphasize the point that it's not just through the word, it can be through the image, it can be through music, it can be through this idea of voice. How do you express your voice, your identity? And for him, it was this idea of religious faith and calligraphy. This is my second book, and I want to give gratitude to my mother, Renko, who's in the audience today. She's the one who I mentioned was incarcerated in Topaz as a baby, and she grew up to be a talented visual artist. This is her painting, and the painting is meant to evoke many things, but in particular, my son's epilepsy. My son, Brendan, is nonverbal and has special needs. And the book is really mainly about that, but it also is a companion project to the first book, Topaz, and continues the theme of Japanese American incarceration, but through the lens of a sort of historical seizure and how that links to his physical and medical seizures, and how those seizures link to other historical, racial, and violence is perpetrated towards marginalized people based on race, sexuality, and other aspects of identity. There's a picture of young me and young Brendan, and I'm holding him on my lap, as you can see. And this is likely before he was diagnosed, and I knew that something was wrong. And it's just a picture of a father and son enjoying each other's connection. And then there's a picture of Brendan, my brave boy. And this is on one of the many hospital visits we went on, where he may need to have an IV for a seizure bout that he's having, or some other epileptic related sense of occasion. So I just wanted you to get a sense of him because his calm and his peace is really what kept us calm and grounded during those hospital visits. So now, going to stop that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is read, based upon the photos that you just saw, I'm going to read a series of poems. And Bryn and Mia, can you give me a heads up? Is this looking good on the presenter view? Is everything working? Okay, just want to make sure. So I'd like to start with a poem. It's the second poem of the book Topaz. And I think for all of you in the audience, I don't know the extent of your awareness about the historical experience of Japanese Americans, but I think this poem will give you an entry point into understanding that. And for me as a younger generation, Japanese American Sansei, third generation, who did not go through the experience directly, but inherited it, this is my sense of both wanting to know more and being frustrated at the fact that there is so much out there that I cannot quite grasp. The poem is called Crossing. No turning back. Deep in the Utah desert now, having left one home to return to the temple of my grandfather. I press the pedal hard. Long behind me, civilization's last sign, a bent post and a wooden board. No food or gas for 200 miles. The tank needling below half full. I smoke Camels to soothe my worry. Is this where it happened? What's left out there of Topaz in the simmering heat? On quartz asphalt, I rush past salt beds. Squint at the horizon for the desert's edge, a lone tower, a flattened barrack, some sign of Topaz, the camp where my mother, her family were imprisoned. As I speed by shrub cactus, the thought of it feels too near, too close. The engine steams, the radiator hisses, gusts gather, wind pushes my Civic side to side, and I grip the steering wheel, strain to see through a windshield smeared with yellow jacket wings, blood of mosquitoes. If I can find it, how much can I really know? Were sandstorms soft as dreams or stinging like nettles? Who held my mother when the wind whipped beige handfuls at her baby cheeks? Was the sand tinged with beige or orange from oxidized mesas? I don't remember my mother's answer to everything. High on coffee and nicotine, I half dream in waves of heat, summon ghosts from the canyon behind thin lines of barbed wire. Our name, Ishida. Ishi means stone, Da, the field. We were gemstones strewn in the wasteland. Only 3 days and 1,000 miles to go before I reach San Francisco, the church where my mother was born and torn away. Maybe Topaz in the desert was long gone, but it lingered in letters, photos, fragments of stories. My mother's room, now mine, the bed pulled blank with iron sheets, a desk set with pen and paper. Here I would come to understand. The next poem I'm going to read focuses on my grandfather, who you saw a photo of earlier, Archbishop Nitin Ishida, the Buddhist priest. And through interviewing him and through speaking with him and through imagining what he went through as he was separated from his family in Department of Justice camps while they were in Topaz, I came to create this poem, and I read it at his funeral as an elegy. It's called Your Hands Guide Me Through Trains. From the bridge, we stare down at the track, searching the arch where rails curve out of darkness. You lift me on your shoulders, and we balance in white light, the dead center approaching. The whistle blows, a rumble climbs through the bones of your feet, through your legs and hands into mine. Your right hand clenches my right. Your left clenches my left. If this were 1942, my hands would be the handle of your suitcase and your purple book scripted in prayer. Torn from family, you board a boxcar, snap open your case, set your brush and ink to the right, stones to the left. Paint your own sea and coast as the plains, grass, and ironwoods rattle by. You dip the brush in each camp and each barrack. Fill the paper with kelp and jellyfish, pebbles and shells. Tape the sheets side by side. When it grows dark, you draw tracks leading to the edge of the tide. Asking for water, your hands unclasp and cling to the wires as men rip the sash from your back. A rifle butt knocks prayer loose from your throat. But it is 1976, a Sunday like any other, when you drape beads over my wrists and open the Lotus Sutra on the bridge, anchor its pages with stones, offer prayers as the trains rush under our feet, our lungs flowering with soot and steam. For years I traveled to your hands, unrolled ocean scrolls from your case. In barracks, you'd held the brush, painting your way out. By 1996, your brushstrokes fade, crumple in my palms. Your fingers grip a cane, waver with chopsticks. Soup, tea, and rice sprig your bib. I feed you, brush your teeth. My right hand clenches your right. My left clenches your left. I lower you in the chair, place your feet on the steel ledges. Grandfather, can we run just once through the gravel along silver rail? Watch flame curl off faces of men smudged in coal. Can you take me to Missoula and Fort Sill, wheels circling back to Crystal City? We arrive at the church where you live, and I wheel you past rows of empty chairs, drape the sash over your back, strike a match, light sticks of incense. Your hands guide me through the years like a black iron rope into the orange glow, a tunnel of smoke, pages returning us to the shores of our home. All right. So I'm going to read one more poem from Topaz that I think will bridge us into my final poem about Brendan. And when I wrote this book, I was in the beginning stages of processing Brendan's condition and what had happened to him in terms of his epilepsy and having a special needs child. So I wrote this poem, Temple Bell Lesson, and there's this big temple bell in the front window of the church. It's massive. And I would put his head in the cup of the bell and lightly ding it, and he would smile and laugh. And I thought, I'm giving him the reverberations of history, and he's enjoying receiving the ancestors. It's called Temple Bell Lesson. Son, I am weighted. You are light. Our ancestors imprisoned, outcast in sand, swinging between scorching air and the insult of blizzards. Their skin bronzed and chilled like brass. Listen to their sorrow ringing. All right. So the final poem I'm going to read is from the new book, Seized, which came out about 6 months ago. And it's a convergence of the historical aspect of my identity and my identity as a father. And so this poem, Seized, Seized, was a creative moment when those things intuitively came together and this poem emerged. Seized. By day, by night, in handcuffs, through mind scramble, brain surged, shock of force, body taut, alerted, taken, outside, inside, anytime, any place, no words to explain. My infant mother, 1942, my young son now. The rug, his twisted body, his head inside. And what it does, red flare or white lightning, fried impulse or smoldering heat, a searing of gray or glitter of stars veiled by fog. Her fragments, yellow orb,
Just a
the
sec.
porch light. That was Siri.
Okay, I found this on
I'm
the
so
web. Birds
sorry.
gray or glitter of stars filled by fog. Check it out.
That has never happened before. I'm going to keep going. A searing of gray or glitter of stars veiled by fog. Her fragments, yellow orb, the porch light, shimmer against her face. The cradle, her mother's arms, a blanket's false cover, itch of wool, hives on skin. Things just happen by bus, by train, in war, electric storms, a horse stable, desert, sand swirl and mind gust, thought sparks, word cloudings, mountains spike against white. A guard's boot, trodden syllable, a thorned cage, wing pierced, baby hawk in wire, my barbed string of words, to capture him, capture her. If he never speaks, I carry him. If she cries for her father, grandmother carries her. Someplace, my mother carries what is unremembered, begins to know when I ask. I don't speak of things I can't know, of despair about my son. We never know where we are going, where love will end us. Thank you. The contributions of Siri made that a very interesting moment. And I did have my cell phone off in the notifications, but Siri really wanted to be a part of that moment. And so I'm just going to roll with it today. I think it's all good. So our next amazing reader is my friend and sister, Mia Ayumi Malhotra, and I'm so happy to introduce her. She's the author of Isako, which was published by Alice James Books in 2018. It's winner of the Alice James Award, the Nautilus Gold Award for Poetry, a National Indie Excellence Award, a Maine Literary Award, and finalist for the California Book Award. I could say more, and her bio has many more accolades and accomplishments, but I would like to turn it over to her so that you can hear her beautiful poetry. So Mia, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you so much to the organizers of this incredible summit. It's an honor to be a part of what's been happening this week. I just have a few poems to read today, and by way of context, I will share my screen here so that you can see a few of the images that I guess give context. So this is, first of all, this is the cover of my book, Isako. I will be reading one poem from this book, and then I'll sort of let it be and read some more recent work that carries forward some of the themes that Brian has so beautifully introduced today. So the first poem that I'll turn to in a moment is an homage to the strong women in my family. And we saw Brian's Obachan. My grandma, my Obachan is not actually in this picture, but my great grandmother, she is. And I come from a family of rose growers. There were many Japanese American flower nurseries in the Bay Area. Now there are some. There are not as many as there used to be. Times have changed, but the history of the flower industry in this region is a really fascinating one, and one that's just deeply intertwined with my family's history. So this is the family hard at work, and if you could keep this image, all the roses and the thorns and the leaves and everything just strewn across the tables in the packing shed. Um, Hopefully that will give some visual, and I mean, you can imagine the sounds too, right? It wasn't a quiet place. It wasn't a slow down and smell the roses kind of place. My grandma used to say, "Don't be a slow poke, be a fast poke." So it was that kind of place. And to bring us forward into the present moment, this is pre-pandemic, of course. This is the Obon Festival held every summer, and there are many different places that the Obon Festival is celebrated. This is where some of my family goes to church, the Palo Alto Buddhist Temple. And I brought my daughters there, so you can see they're sitting next to me. And that was the first time that they got to hear the taiko drums, and they were absolutely captivated. The sense of they're being drawn into this kind of ancestral circle was really strong, and so I sort of used that momentum to write a poem later that summer, which will be the second piece that I'll read. So again, if you can open yourself to some of the sounds and the reverberations, like Brian was saying about the bell in his family's temple. Some of that is present in my work as well. And then this last image that I'll show is the bounty of summer. So again, there's my daughter. You'll recognize her hat again. But we are picking strawberries, and so much of my work is informed by my family's history with the land in this region, and by the sense of generational time and how the generations are rooted to the land, and how our stories kind of come together from what it's meant to cultivate land, to wait on the land, to make a living out of it, to be displaced from the land, as my grandparents and great grandparents' generation were taken from their homes and sent across the country, some to Arkansas, in trains, with the windows boarded up, and sent into dust, into the desert, where they again cultivated gardens from the dust. So that is just some of the the context for the poems that I will read now. So I have three, and I will start with the opening poem in Isako Isako, just because this invites the family in. And the title is "To My Many Mothers, Issei and Nisei," and those are generational reference words. So Issei is the first generation, so that's a reference to my great grandparents. They're the ones that actually left Japan and moved to the United States, and then the Nisei is the second generation, and so that was the first generation of U.S. born citizens, and yet they also were included in the imprisonment of World War II. And so I remember them with this poem and honor them as well. To my many mothers, Issei and Nisei. Praise be to beef liver stew, to gravy biscuits and home-baked bread, to women in work pants and suspenders who worked like dogs in the packing shed, up to elbows in rose clippings. You fed us well, O goddesses of goulash and green beans, of Sunday dinners wrangled from the coop. For penny money and seamstressing, praise. For parsnips and sweet potatoes, praise. Even for the years lost to sharecropping and strawberries, hallelujah. You worked until the final hour, then rose 3 days later, baby squalling on your hip, back to breaking canes, clipping hooks, hustling the men through lunch hour. No breaks, boys. Hallelujah to Pond's cold cream, to curling rags and church bento socials. Praise to the nursery truck, revving in the morning, the clank of steel pipes and boiler house rumble. All glory to the Berkeley streetcar and Key Route electric train, the smokestacks of Richmond and foggy peaks of San Francisco. And because they're what taught us to praise, glory to the roses run wild, the packing shed left to cobweb. Praise to the crowded horse stalls and half-built barracks of Aurora, Arkansas, dusty sheets and muffled nights of Block 99C, 100 Sakai Chu, 102 Sakai Ruby, 103 Sakai Kazue. Oh, praise to the camp midwives, the Nisei girls shooting hoops and swatting birdies when their mothers weren't looking, and to the college-bound co-ed who crossed the country, camp release papers in hand. Hallelujah, her truth marches on. So I'll transition now into some more recent work. So this first poem is a family notebook poem. It's called Pajaro Dunes, and this is the poem that I wrote after, the taiko drums and the strawberry picking. And it's interesting how these things experienced in the present moment have a kind of circularity, in that they bring us back to the histories that mark us, that mark our families. I think I feel this as a fourth generation Japanese American, but that's not a unique experience. I'm sure many of us feel that same way, regardless of where our lineage ties us. But the poem opens with a meditation on the sea, and something about its vastness, its timelessness, its immense expanse. I think offers an opportunity to think about, how time moves in these currents and circularities. So this is Pajaro Dunes' family notebook. The sea is hungry here. The sand so fine, it clings to the face. Clutched in the fist, it spills through, falls away like powder. I'm reading about the schizophrenias. Out here, my mind's its own kind of wild. We crowd in the car, drive through streets of what could have been. The haute enchilada, hairs on, the freeze-dried taxidermy place. My mother murmurs in the front seat, the unborn child, the lost sister, gone, and me born in the shadow of their passing. Here's the story of the life I never lived. Sandy loam, strawberry fields, rows of berry brambles, and plump to bursting tartness, seagrass, coastal fog. Sometimes they talked about it. You would have loved her, but mostly there was the sense of a soul slipped away too soon, lost before it had much life to live. The sea lays a wet stain on my mind. Where do we go to meet our dead? Where can we find the lost? In the measured wild of the taiko's throb, its bachi-bachi beat. Every year, the drum staccato punctuated by shouts, the pulse that holds us all, dead, living, lost, found. I hear it in the pounding surf as my mother chases the spray, kite twirling overhead like a hurt bird through air. The wind's swift kick, and she's a child again, hurtling across sand. Your arm remembers the feeling, she says. It's something you never forget. So true. We've been lost before on this distant shore, but still remember our way. And this final poem that I'll read is another family notebook poem, and it's one that I wrote in the spring of last year, shortly after the entire nation went into lockdown. which was its own kind of desolation and its own kind of desert. And initially, this felt like a deeply personal experience, the anxiety, the fear, the sense of being torn from life as I knew it and as my family knew it. However, as I contemplated more deeply and also in conversation with other Japanese American poets, Bryn, Brian, some of our other friends, Todd Kaneko, Brandon Shimoda, I realized that there was a deeper cultural sense in which we were experiencing this as well, which is to say a historical sense as well. And I thought of, the streets of the Japanese American neighborhoods after the internment and after everyone was rounded up, sent to racetracks, boarded into trains. And I thought those streets and those homes must have looked a lot like our neighborhood does right now. And this was in the early days of the pandemic when, we were all afraid to go outside. And it was just ghostly, and we just existed as these specters on Zoom. And a little bit of that is still with us, I think, but we've learned how to live, right? And hope is coming. And I see a lot of that sort of growing through in this poem, and in life as we continue to live. But again, moving forward, Bryn always says this: moving forward into the future feels like moving into the past. And I think that wisdom is something I've held with me through this unbearable season, which is actually its own kind of life. So again, this is Sheltering Family Notebook. And there's an epigraph. It's for my daughters with lines from Louise Glick. Ready or not, here we are. We've been lost and found, gone underground. We've raised cardboard cities, pounded flowers to pulp, danced like seeds sprouting. We've been stuck in the mud, traced ourselves in chalk, watched our bodies turn to brilliant dust. Around us, the death toll rises. Something comes into the world unwelcome, calling disorder. Ordered home, we're baking. My daughters peer into the oven. I don't know how much longer, I say, lost, too, in this interminable landscape. Somewhere in the desert, my great-grandfather lifts a stone from a dry creek bed. Sui meaning water. Seki meaning stone. Suiseki as in viewing stones naturally formed. For days, he contemplates its dimensions. A desolate island, perhaps. Blueprint of some past or future grief. How many times have we made life from dust? First strawberries, then carnations, roses by trial and error. Unearthed, we found the white of bones, wet of saliva, sound of singing. At the end of my suffering, there was a door. One day, we will re-enter the house of the living. A local store texts, "Open now, face masks and gloves for sale." My daughter chants rhymes, writes her name for the first time. She's learning the names of things: yeast, virus, oxalis. She calls it the pandemonium. Enculturation, they say, bringing a child into language, from raw to cooked, pale and unformed to browned. Friday, she kneads dough. Monday, she pushes stones into place, forms the letter Y. We touch the rough, chiseled edges and count the days. Outside, fever rages. It's spring. She picks flowers with her sister. Wild irises with gold veins, bellflowers with red and yellow striations, their bodies So beloved, I sometimes mistake one for the other. Climb into bed beside me. The hours stretch. Dusk lengthens over the trees. From my window, I can see the neighbor's lit A-frame. I was once afraid. I still am. But every night the sun sets, and in the gloaming, the star, or is it the light from a plane, blinks on. So those are my family notebooks. There will be many more. That's all I seem to write these days. But it is my distinct pleasure now to introduce my dear friend and just master poet, Brynn Saito. I'm just going to go ahead and read her bio because you all should know everything about her. Well, this isn't everything, but this is a lot of it. She's the author of 2 books of poetry. She is the co-founder of the Yonsei Memory Project, to which I feel deeply indebted. The Yonsei Memory Project uses art and storytelling to connect the World War II era incarceration of the Japanese American community with current struggles for justice. Bryn's poetry has been nominated for a Northern California Book Award, and her work has appeared in the New York Times, Vogue, and the American Poetry Review. And currently, Bryn is an assistant professor of creative writing and English at Cal State Fresno. So if you could all welcome Bryn with your most warm and open hearts, you are in for a treat.
Thank you so much, Mia and Brian and the organizers. Mia, I love those notebook poems and that last one, just speaking to this moment so beautifully. And we've thinking about how it's connecting you to ancestors and our community's history as well. And Brian, you're doing that work too, I think, just making those bridges. And so great to be here with all of you. And thank you to those of you in internet land listening. I'm also going to share a couple photos, and yeah, I think I will do that now. To preface my reading. And you'll see there's Brian there, right here. Mia, are you in this photo? I don't think yet, but Mia joined us later on that day. This is some of the work we do with Yonsei Memory Project, just gathering in community spaces with our elders and telling stories. And I'll get to that a little bit more in a second. But as you see in this slide, you can see my grandparents. My grandmother Alma and grandfather Mitsuo and my parents' parents, and they met at the Gila River incarceration camp in Arizona. So they were about college aged, 22, 25, when they were sent to the camps, and they fell in love. They met there. My auntie was born in the camps, and my father and his brother were born shortly thereafter. And a lot of my writing, sort of like seeing about Brian's writing and Mia's, it's like we're going back to these landscapes and these memories and sort of trying to understand what happened and make sense of it. And it strikes me this is sort of an intergenerational project. I feel like my whole life I could be trying to make sense of that moment of such sort of trauma and extreme injustice for our community, and also a moment of resilience and joy and survival and life. The unbearable season, Mia said, the unbearable season, life is happening. That's my parents in the center there, and the image on the right, again, you'll see Brian teaching a workshop, but these were just some of the photos from Yonsei Memory Project. Yonsei means 4th generation Japanese American, and Nikiko Masumoto and I founded the Yonsei Memory Project in 2017, and it was sort of about just making these community spaces to dialogue about this time, to think about how we wanted to carry on the memories of our elders, many of whom have passed away. Those who lived through camp have passed away or are growing older now. So what is our task as Sansei and Yonsei and Gosei and the future generations in doing this memory work? And yeah, so sometimes we get together, we'd write poems together, and we'd tell stories and do performances and just use art to sort of do this memory work. I think this is my last slide here. This is my dad, who was in the photo before too, Greg Saito. And he was a football coach and a basketball coach and a golf coach and an athlete. And so I appreciate this sort of soccer poetry connection, athleticism and poetry. Everything, I feel like everything I learned about teaching, I learned from my father, Coach Saito, because he just had this, he has this irrepressible spirit, and he's just a champion for youth and for energy and sports and community. And he just brought that to everything in his teaching and his coaching. And I think I've inherited some of that as a professor in a weird way. So my dad and I took a trip together to Gila River, sort of pilgrimage in 2019. And yeah, we went back to the site, where his parents met, the site of incarceration. The Gila River camp is located on the sovereign land of the Gila River Indian community in Arizona. So we had 2 guides from the community there take us around the landscape and show us where the barracks were 80 years ago now almost. And that sketch on the left is a sketch of part of that Gila River area, that camp. And out of respect, the community there asked that we didn't take photos, but we could do sketches and write poetry and engage with the land that way, instead of, sort of clicking these photos and putting them all over social media. So my student, Manivon Sayazon, was gracious enough to do that sketch of my father based on a photo that I had personally taken. And if you go to that You Are Missing website, you'll see other portraits of other elders and folks from my community who were part of this larger letter project that my dad and I did after we came back from Gila River. And so with that, I think I'm just going to read you 2 things today. I'm going to read you the letter I wrote to my father after we got back from Gila River. And if you go to that youaremissing.com, you can see his reply to me, and I can put it in the chat in a little bit. But we got back from Gila, and I used, poetry and letters to kind of process that journey that we did together. So this is a letter to my father. Dad, there's a new way I see the garden now, the one you've been tending for decades on Garden Avenue, the street of our family home. In haiku, written by former camp prisoners, days and seasons are tracked by the falling leaves of the moss rose petal to earth. Poets in camp numbered months and years by the memory of their garden homes left behind on the West Coast, flowering rhododendrons and peony buds imagined as remaining firm. I think of us traveling that week in the summer of 2019, away from California, along the train's course, through Arizona and on to Gila River. How far I brought you from your garden. Did you think of the sagos, the summer tomatoes and basil, the azaleas and red maples, the night blooming lantana, trees needing trimming, grass going brown, all the work awaiting you? Did you imagine the dogs chirping, the silent white bucket, and mom dragging the hose across the lawn to wake the fountain? Here in the Southwest, I find myself pining for the great Central Valley, as I did when I lived in New York, or that decade by the bay, exhausted from cold bridges and colder waters, longing with my entire body for the landscapes of childhood's kingdom, smog dust and all. I understand now I am nothing. I am the daughter of a living father, blessed to be returning to you after our fire and ice travels through North American landscapes, spotted by our elders' lives, their prison desert homes, and other jails and prisons, with and without bars and barbed wire. You were not taken. In the night and shirtless, you were not captured or broken by the century's light, despite my nightmares. You took your time in the summer garden, where Lee and I played as the light set, basiling our bodies against mosquitoes, baking mud sweets in California's sugary dusk. Dad, your voice is wise now beyond kindness. I'll see you soon. So that's my dad. Coach Saito, traveling with his Yonsei daughter, dragging him all across the country, making him do this memory work that he eventually opened up to. But I think as a sansei, he was a little bit reticent. He wasn't a sansei poet like Brian. He was a sansei coach Saito. So there was a bit of a hesitancy to do this work with me, this memory work, but he did. And I'm very grateful for that. I think I'm going to read this. I'm going to read something new to close. It's four parts, but they're short. And I only read it once before and I messed up a lot. So I'll probably mess up a lot because it's a lot of just kind of strange words, but it's called Self-Portrait Disguised as Stones. As Mia and Brian know, I have these stone poems where I sort of inhabit the stone in the desert and think, what did the stone see and say during this time? What would the walls say if they could speak? That kind of thing. So this one is a little bit stranger. It's kind of, I don't know what it is, but it's Self-Portrait Disguised as Stones, and it's after Gila River, a site of Japanese American incarceration. And it was, again, written in that time after I got back from the pilgrimage. So thank you all for listening. And I know there were some questions already, so I'm looking forward to diving into those. And okay, here we go. Here's the stones. Part 1. Were I there, under eve and uncrushed, it's set in some dust corner after desert snow, were I riparian speck, alkaline and present, adventuring, redressed, mountain chip, moss rose, what could I speak? I might have soaked secret after secret, seen the spark birthing seed, birthing daughter, and sons, their unwired love. I might have drank joy from the blameless, seen the meeting of the gambler and survivor, of addicts, two laboring landless. For years I was restless, amethyst disguised as ash rock, freckled, forgotten, noctilucent daikon. I was afraid of my face. 2. Do you walk through constructed silence, arousing memory? Do you follow the long-limbed beetle around the ancestral mountain, arresting memory? Of Capricorn and Gemini, of Nebula and Violin, one daughter of queens wandering creosote. Of Milky Way and Wonder Throne, of Swallowtail and Milkweed, hardy grass and omen ants gather. Birds trill electronic, a cloudless sulfur catches light. Let me down slowly. 3, I was there, I was restless. My mind, a body, my body sweeping life cells in a single direction over Earth's face. See freedom for centuries, a chemical fist unfolding in the fescue. Desire did this. Fertile dust and diatom seas, forest lung and red rock a roiling grace. You die. I collapse in the hollow before language. Not in your father's throat in Hiroshima, everlasting rock monuments, riding on the crane's wing, folded by the dead one under a future sky. And 4, I'm a single stone with dual souls, 2, then 3, handfuls of rock shard under dim, immense heaven. One conflict illuminates the other. Our hexagonal suffering in sky time, our moonstone super enemies. I'm talking about the garden now, how it stared down the wolf heart. 1. Roots hold on to each other, uncapsized under summer soil. Sheer history, traveling underground arrows. One cross holds the sea dogs at bay, the other archives light. Unbeast me, pack of dogs, take my palm, open me to the secret memory. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening. Maybe I'll pass it back to Brian now.
Yeah, lovely, lovely. Love the new work, Bryn. And I agree with you about Mia's poems, really getting the goosebumps and chills today from you two. So I think that, as you said, Bryn, there are some questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and ask I would love to hear from you two. I'll just go ahead and recite one. So the first question is from Liz, and this is for all of us. So Liz is teaching an introductory to poetry course that begins next week. And I'd love, oh, this is great. She'd love to have our poems or share them with her students, I believe, as well as read our poems. Where's the best place to find your current poetry online? So, Bryn, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll put some links to some of the online work, including the poem I wrote, the letter I wrote to my dad. That's online, and there's a link also to my website, which has a bunch of different poems that are published online or that are accessible online. So I'm happy to put those in the chat, and that's awesome to hear that you're going to be teaching poetry and sharing our work with some students. That's really lovely. Thank you.
And Mia?
Well, I will do the same. I just dropped a link in the chat to my website, which has links to some poems that are online. I think that's probably the best place to begin. I think it's really exciting that you're going to start teaching an intro to poetry class and want to share our work. I don't know, Brian, if you want to read the second question or if you'd like me to just jump right in.
Sure, yeah, I will. And Liz, I will in a moment just at some point I'll drop my own website into the chat, as with Bryn and Mia. I have all the online poems under each book project, so they're pretty easy to access. So thank you for your interest. We appreciate it a lot. And okay, this is for you, Mia. Do you know if Nellie, that's in quotes, Nellie had been given a different version of her name at birth? I ask because my grandma Nellie had been named Manuela. Just curious. And that's from Liz as well.
Yeah, that I actually don't know. And she was, so my aunt Nellie, she was married to my great uncle Sam, who was like one of the brothers in the family. So I don't know too much about her family because she married in, but it's something I could ask. I would imagine she had a Japanese name as well. I don't know.
So I'm in the chat now, and this is from Beau, Beau. Sorrow, memory, and strength run through all of these poems. Why does poetry offer shelter to all of these feelings? Is there any limit? Wow, that's a very poetic question. Sorrow, memory, strength run through all of these poems. Why does poetry offer shelter to all of these feelings? Is there any limit? I love that question. Bryn, you wanna start off?
Yeah, I love the idea of a poem as shelter. That's so beautiful. Thank you, Beau. Poetry does offer shelter. Yeah, I feel like for me, poetry was just a free space of truth telling and expression and memory and feeling. And when I was writing it as a young person, I never knew if anyone would read my poems. I think I wrote the poems I needed. I just needed to write. So it became this space where all those things, the sorrow and the memory and the strength could exist. And I don't think there is a limit. I think poetry shelters us like the sky shelters us in a way. It's just infinite what it can hold. Thank you so much. I'm just really moved by the question. Yeah. Mia? Yeah.
Oh, I have to think a bit. um, I I guess there's something about poetry that allows for more than what just a story. And I say just, but I don't really mean just. But a poem allows for different things than a story or a historical account. And um, I say this contextualized, of course, by the history that we've sort of evoked around this event. Because I know that I've read, historical accounts or biographical accounts or autobiographical accounts of, camp survivors. And there's something different, I agree, that is enabled by the poem. And I think it's because you can move so quickly between, something that's happening now, something that happened before, something that happens in an imagined space. And I think so much of that comes from, what's possible through metaphor, what's possible through repetition and chant and invocation. These are just like song techniques, right? It's like you can cast a spell and everything comes alive with the poem. And you might try that in a story or a prose piece, but the poem, yeah, it does offer a unique shelter. And at the same time, I do wonder about the limits of poetry. I think there was a time in life where I felt maybe when I was a student and trying to learn how to be a poet, and I felt like, why am I doing this? I felt, tempted to go to law school and be a lawyer where language could enact, could legislate or interpret, legislation, could actually shape things in a different way. But I think poetry just enacts change in a different way. I think it's neither here nor there. If one is more powerful, I think there are limitations to both. I think all things have limits, right? So with a poem, you may not be able to change how a law is interpreted, but you can change, the heart of and the perception and the way of thinking, the structure of thinking around that law. So maybe that's the little side way in. But yeah, really good question.
Yeah, friends, that I love your answers, Bryn and Mia. It's a very philosophical, existential question. I think about being an undergraduate student and having never heard of the Japanese American incarceration experience, and then suddenly one day learning about it in an Asian American Studies course. And that sense of rage, that sense of anger, that this had been withheld, right? So I think that I really believe that poetry and writing is what allowed me to transmute the anger into a sort of shelter, right? So instead of just being enraged and feeling that this injustice, there was no answer to it, felt like poetry gave me some kind of transmuting force to take that injustice and to make it into a story, a narrative in which there were real people that were dimensional, that had gone through this. And our ancestors, our family members, I do see the poems as sort of a container to honor and acknowledge what happened to them, whereas otherwise it would be invisible and silenced, right? But I agree with my friends here that the limitations of that is also true, right? So now with the current situation in America, I feel that. And I feel that the writing keeps me sane and grounded, that I can process these things happening. But I think that we're teachers, we're activists, we're people that also have to do more than just write. And I do think, I believe in poetry. I think poetry and art have the power to really empower us. But I think that it becomes even more powerful when coupled and joined with other things in our own identities. So I hope that answers the question. I thought it was a great one. And it looks like Alicia has a question, and we can just go back to Bryn to begin this round. How and why did your path lead you to become a poet? I love these questions today, very spiritual. Bryn, what do you think? How did you become a poet? I don't even know. What do you think?
I don't even know. Yeah, I don't know, my friend. Kind of, I was resonating with what you said, Brian, about just the anger that's, and just the emotions that I think I was having in response to things I was experiencing as a young person, things I was learning about our history. and poetry became a way, writing just in general became a way to transmute and translate and just move some of that through. And I think that's where it began for me as well. Maybe with short stories first. I did that a lot before I really dove into poetry. I had a couple mentors like Ishmael Reed along the way who just, you have those like mentors who like see something in you and you're really shy and you're like, I don't know. And they're like, you might like this poetry thing, keep doing it. And so I think with the voices of my mentors and my community encouraging me, that really helped. And I think you become a poet every time you write a poem, or, it's like I'm still trying to actively be a poet every day, especially in response to everything going on in the AAPI community and the violence and everything on the news. And it's like I need to make myself into a poet or a maker of something every day or every week to just continue to transmute everything that keeps rising. It's like, wow, life never ends. Life doesn't stop. Even beyond, you think about the ancestors, I still hear their voices. They're still alive. They're here. So yeah, the path of a poet, it's just this practice. Yeah, for me. How about you, Mia? When did you become a poet?
Well, I had an aunt who gave me a journal, like a pink journal, when I was in 4th grade. And I think I wrote my first poem in in that pink journal. But even before that, I think I was raised to be an observer primarily. My family, like I've talked about before, has roots in California that run pretty deep. But when I was young, my immediate family moved to Southeast Asia. So I was actually a child in Laos, and then I went to high school in Thailand. And so my sense of myself was always as someone who existed a little bit outside kind of what was happening. I just felt a little removed, and so um, I guess to me, being a poet is about attentiveness and observation. Responsiveness primarily. So I think I've always kind of held back a little bit and watched and sort of documented. And maybe initially that was a survival mechanism. I think it's kind of become a way of being, and now it's a way that I find life. And I think I also had some really phenomenal teachers along the way, people who sort of demonstrated to me through their work and their mentorship and the communities that they built around them, communities of students and working artists, just what it could look like to not do or be a poet in a solitary way, but in an engaged, active, alive way that really creates transformation in the world. So in college, I worked with Sheree Moraga, who has changed so many people's lives and changed the landscape of thinking and being, for so many of us. But I was really lucky to be a part of the community she built among students. And then I think she kind of pointed the way, because before then I was just sort of trying to find myself in creative writing programs and these workshops run by folks who just wanted to see how polished my craft could be. And I think poetry can be about that, but to live it as a life, there's so much more. Yeah. Brian, what about you? Actually, I haven't heard your story before. Tell.
I wrote a story about a pet rock named Loafer at like 5 years old. My mom had signed me up for writing courses. And I think for me, I was raised in a family of artists. My father's a trombonist. My brother's a cellist. My mother's a painter. My grandfather's a calligrapher. My grandmother's a haiku poet. And when I was younger, it didn't strike me as being atypical or any different than any family. But as I grow older, sometimes people say, "Oh, wow, you come, everyone in your family is an artist." And so I grew up, it was just part of the DNA of our family environment. And I think for me, I resonate with what you two say about the idea of the maker, the idea of mentorship, and the idea of community. And for me, poetry is that space that stitches together all those things, right? I can make, I can have community and mentorship, and even the Japanese American literary tradition, reading those works and discovering them. Wow, the charge that gave me inspired me to want to pass that on as well and tell these stories